There's a farm about 40 miles east of where I grew up, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And the first time I drove past it, I actually pulled over. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because of the potatoes. I'd been growing potatoes for 11 years at that point. 11 years of digging up sad, fist-sized tubers out of compacted clay, wondering every single August what I'd done wrong. And here was a man, no tractor, no irrigation line, no soil amendments I could identify, pulling what looked like 200 pounds of potatoes out of a single barrel. One barrel. I sat on the side of that road for a while and thought about all the advice I'd followed that had never once given me a result like that. Here's what nobody tells you about growing potatoes. The single biggest mistake, the one that costs most home gardeners 2/3 of their potential harvest before they've even planted, isn't about fertilizer. It isn't about watering schedule. It isn't about variety selection, though people will argue about variety selection until the sun goes down. The mistake is about space. Specifically, it's about the assumption that potatoes need to spread out horizontally to produce well. They don't. What they need is to grow upward. And the Amish figured this out, not as a novelty technique, not as a gardening hack, but as a practical response to the same problem that all of us face: limited land, big families, the need to eat through winter. I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I'm not going to tell you that everyone who uses this method gets exactly 200 pounds from a single barrel. I'm not going to tell you it's foolproof or that results don't vary by climate, by variety, by the quality of growing medium you use. What I am going to tell you is that this method, when done right, will outperform a conventional in-ground potato row by a factor of 3 to 1 on the same footprint. And I'll explain exactly why that's possible, because it actually makes complete sense once you understand what a potato plant is trying to do underground. And I'm going to explain the simplified version too, for anyone who doesn't want to source 4 different materials or build the optimal growing mix from scratch. Because the most important thing is that you try it once and see what happens, not that you do it perfectly the first time. The man I watched that afternoon in Lancaster County wasn't doing anything that looked particularly dramatic. He was working methodically, the way people work when they've done something 10,000 times. He had 4 barrels positioned along the south-facing wall of an equipment shed, and he harvested them in sequence, tilting each one onto its side and rolling the contents out onto a tarp. The potatoes weren't just at the bottom of the barrel. They were distributed through the entire column of growing medium, top to bottom, layered through 18 inches of material. That's what I didn't understand yet. That's the part I'd been missing for over a decade. A potato plant doesn't just produce potatoes at its roots. It produces them along its stem, specifically on underground stem segments called stolons. Every inch of stem that's buried beneath the soil surface is a potential production zone. What the conventional row planting method does, by design, is limit how much of your stem ever gets buried. You plant your seed potato at a depth of 4 to 6 inches. The plant grows up, you mound a little soil around the base once or twice during the season, and that's it. You're harvesting from maybe 6 to 8 inches of buried stem at the end of all that work. But a potato stem can run 18 to 24 inches long before it emerges from the soil. That entire length, every inch of it, will set potatoes if it's kept covered, kept dark, and kept from drying out. The barrel method buries that full length. That's the whole secret. It sounds almost too simple. It is almost too simple, and it will still outproduce your row by 3 to 1. What's important to understand is that those stolons, those lateral underground stems that branch off the main stem and terminate in tubers, are not just a nice-to-have. They are the entire yield of your plant. The potatoes you eat are modified stem tissue, not roots, stems. And stem tissue is incredibly responsive to burial. The moment you cover a section of stem that was previously exposed to light, that section begins producing stolons within a matter of days. The plant is not confused by this. The plant is doing exactly what it's designed to do. The conventional method just never gives it the raw material, the buried stem length, to do it at full capacity. I spent 4 years trying to get good results from potatoes before I started asking why my results were bad instead of just trying harder. I'd doubled my seed potato budget. I had amended the soil with compost, with bone meal, with green sand. I'd tried German butterball, Yukon Gold, Russian banana, Kennebec, every variety that the seed catalogs told me was productive and suited to my climate. My best season, I got about 40 pounds from a 12-foot row, which is roughly what you'd expect from a 12-foot row planted the conventional way, managed the conventional way, or as someone who's reasonably competent. That's the problem. The conventional method has a ceiling, and that ceiling is set by how much of your potato stem ever gets buried. No amount of fertilizer or careful watering is going to push you past it. What finally broke that pattern for me wasn't a book. It was being nosy about someone else's garden. A neighbor of mine, retired, grew up in a farming family in Ohio, had 3 whiskey barrels by her back fence that she'd been growing potatoes in for years. I asked her about it, and she explained the method in about 4 sentences. Plant at the bottom, add soil as the plant grows, keep adding until you reach the top, dump it out in August. She made it sound like the most obvious thing in the world, which, once I understood the biology, it is. So here's how you actually do this. You're going to need a container that's at least 18 inches deep and at least 16 inches in diameter. A standard oak half barrel is perfect. They run about 20 to 24 inches in depth and 18 inches across. A 30-gallon trash can with holes drilled in the bottom works just as well. A fabric grow bag in the 30 to 40-gallon range is excellent, actually better than a hard container in some ways because the air pruning at the sides prevents roots from circling. What doesn't work is anything shallower than 14 inches. You've given up too much vertical growing space and you'll get conventional results. The depth is the whole point. Drainage is not optional. If your container holds water, your potatoes will rot. If you're using a barrel or a trash can, drill a minimum of 12 quarter-inch holes in the bottom, clustered toward the center and spread to the edges. If you're worried about losing growing medium through those holes, lay a single sheet of newspaper over the bottom before you add any soil. It'll decompose by the time roots reach it, but it'll hold your material in place for the first few weeks. For fabric grow bags, drainage is built in. You don't need to do anything. A word about your seed potatoes before we get into the mix, because this is another place where a lot of people throw away money without realizing it. Seed potatoes are not the same as grocery store potatoes. Commercially sold potatoes are often treated with a sprout inhibitor, a chemical that prevents them from developing eyes in storage, and those inhibitors can persist long enough to seriously delay or prevent germination when you try to use them as seed. You want certified seed potatoes from a garden center or seed supplier. They'll be labeled as certified disease-free, which matters because many potato diseases are seed-borne, meaning they're already in the tuber when you plant it. Spending $4 on certified seed instead of using the potatoes going soft in your pantry is not a luxury, it's the baseline. Beyond that, look for seed potatoes with at least 2 or 3 well-developed eyes, the indentations on the surface where sprouts emerge. 1 eye per seed piece is functional but slow. 2 to 3 eyes means faster, more vigorous early growth. Now, and this is where people tend to veer off course, you're not filling this barrel with straight potting mix or straight garden soil. Both of those on their own will compact over time and suffocate your stolons. What you want is a medium that stays loose and airy throughout the season because the roots and stolons need to expand through it without resistance. The mix that I've settled on is 1 part good quality compost, 1 part aged wood chip fines or leaf mold, and 1 part perlite or coarse sand. This gives you something that holds moisture, because potatoes want consistent moisture, but drains freely and doesn't compact. If you want a simpler starting point, a quality bagged potting mix cut with 20% perlite will work. It's not as good, but it'll work. And I'll tell you more about the simplified version in a few minutes for those of you who don't want to source 4 different materials. You start by adding 4 inches of your growing mix to the bottom of the barrel. 4 inches, not 6, not 8, 4. You're going to plant your seed potatoes right on top of that initial layer, spacing them so that no 2 seed potatoes are closer than 6 inches to each other or to the barrel wall. In a standard 18-inch barrel, you can fit 2 to 3 seed potatoes comfortably. Don't crowd them. I know it's tempting, especially if you've got a lot of seed potatoes in not many containers, but crowded plants compete for the same stolons and you'll end up with dozens of very small potatoes instead of a manageable number of good-sized ones. After placing your seed potatoes, cover them with 3 inches of your growing mix. That's all. 3 inches over the top, so they're now sitting under 7 total inches of material. Water it in gently. Then you wait. The waiting part is hard if you're a person who wants to do things to your garden. What's happening underground during this period, which will run about 2 to 3 weeks depending on your soil temperature, is that the seed potato is establishing its root system and starting to push up a shoot. Soil temperature matters here. Potato shoots emerge most vigorously when the medium stays between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Below 50 degrees, germination slows dramatically. Above 80, you'll start to see stress. If you're in a climate with cool springs, plant later than you think you should. A seed potato sitting in cold soil does almost nothing. A seed potato in warm soil moves fast.